Let me go ahead and move to this Tim Dillon CNN interview, because there are a couple parts here I want to get your reaction to that I think are interesting. So this is a long interview. I watched the whole thing yesterday. It's about an hour long. They posted the whole thing uncut. The interviewer is a woman named Elle Reeves, who became kind of famous for the documentary she did on Charlottesville when she was with Vice News. And so she asked Tim Dillon this question of whether he is part of a new establishment. Let's take a listen to that.
Do you feel like you're part of a new establishment that's being created?
I don't think I'm part of a new establishment. I think it would be pretty difficult to look at these podcasts. I know it's a popular thing right now, especially in certain media circles, to say that after running an incredibly unpopular candidate who was introduced very late in the race because an elderly man who could not be the president, who everyone told was functioning as the president for 4 years. I don't think I'm a new establishment. If you weigh, again, a few comedians with podcasts versus all of the people that supported Kamala Harris, you know, Democrat donors, billionaires, big people, if the idea is that me and a few comedians have more power than multi-billionaires, huge media institutions, a whole political party apparatus, I just don't think most people are going to buy that. I think it seems like a great way to excuse running an unpopular candidate on a platform that American people weren't sold on.
What do you think about that?
Well, full disclosure, I loved him, and he's a friend of mine. But I think Tim is right. I think there's a bit more to it than what he was saying. And I think that, you know, it's almost like, you know, when you use this term, the establishment, it's like, well, what are you really saying?
Yeah,
here?
it's sort of like woke. It becomes like, you know, it can mean anything to anyone.
So in terms of political power, like, you know, okay, there are big shows that have big audiences. And so, yeah, maybe, you know, we just saw the sitting president of the United States kind of leverage that. It's kind of insane that every politician is not attempting to leverage that. But right, what Tim is saying about how you have the three-letter agencies, you have the Congress and the Supreme Court and the presidency, and you have huge, gigantic news corporations, and you have Hollywood and academia. There are all these things. So yes, it is ridiculous to call Theo Von the establishment. But the dynamic that what has happened is that the American people have lost all trust in every institution. And so now they are flooding over to the podcast scene, and they have much more trust in those people because they're just real people. Like, however you feel about Joe Rogan and Theo Von, they're just real people, and they're just telling you how they feel about something. And sometimes they're spot on about that stuff. The point is that it's not that any of us are the new establishment. It's that the establishment lied through their freaking teeth over and over and over again to the American people, to the point that the American people just went, we don't believe a word you say anymore. And because they were intentionally lying to cover up their unbelievable levels of corruption. And again, like, you could just rattle these things off, but like in the 21st century, what has the establishment handed the American people? Okay, like we got 9/11, which they did not protect us from. Then they lied us into war after war after war, each one being a catastrophe, lying us through the entire thing. I mean, 19 years in Afghanistan, they were saying, the army we're building up is doing a great job, and they're going to totally keep the Taliban down as soon as we leave. Over and over, you know, like we were just going through the stuff with Putin, lie after lie after lie. The stuff, the way they screwed Bernie Sanders out of the nomination, just blatantly cheated against him. Then they just blatantly interfered in the election in 2020, you know, silencing people, the Hunter Biden laptops, killing that story. After a year, you know, of locking the country down, which was kind of proven to be all based on pseudoscience from a virus that they freaking made themselves, and then lied through their teeth about that so they could cover it up. Then they tried to, you know, tell us that this clearly senile man was? Like, how much do you think you can lie? Oh, and by the way, there was a giant pedophile ring that is still redacted for national security purposes. Like, what?
We'll get to
you
that.
know? I mean,
Yeah.
but like, what the hell? Like, it doesn't take that much. You don't have to be a super genius to look at this and go, I know what's going on here. You're all a bunch of corrupt liars, and I trust Theo Vaughn and Joe Rogan more than I trust, Anderson Cooper.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think that's a big piece of it. I think because that term establishment is so, up for grabs at this point, that it's easy for Tim Dillon in that moment to make her question look just like silly, like, oh, what, you think I'm more powerful than the CIA? Get out of here. But I also think he doesn't grapple with the way the world has changed in the way you're talking about. And also the fact, like, look, Republicans have the White House, the Senate, the Supreme Court. There's been a huge cultural shift. The podcast sphere that Tim Dillon is part of was, broadly supportive of Donald Trump. The richest people in the world are behind the MAGA movement at this point. They're all lined up behind him at the inauguration. Elon Musk is literally the richest person in the world and probably the second most powerful person, if not the most powerful person in the country. And so, if that grouping, if that ecosystem of power doesn't represent some kind of establishment, then to me the word is just completely meaningless at this point. And no one's saying like Tim Dillon or you or like, Theo Vaughn or Rogan or whatever are like the pinnacle of the establishment, but part of the ecosystem. Like if you are, broadly in sort of that ecosystem, then I think it is fair to say, and I do think you're right, that in part it's because the previous quote unquote establishment had so clearly failed that there's been, a kind of regrouping and an interest in alternative voices, certainly in terms of the media ecosystem.
Yeah, well, I think that there's no question that there's kind of like an upstart wannabe new elite that have through their support behind Donald Trump, they would like to be the ruling elite now, and they're kind of like, hey, the Rockefellers and the Morgans had their turn, and we'd like to be the new ruling elite. I don't know that they certainly have a lot of wealth. I don't know that they've acquired that level of power, but I guess that remains to be seen.
Some of them are the same people, Bezos was, and then now
Miriam Adelson is,
even Elon Musk, was previously besties with Obama, and now he's all in with Trump. And yes, Miriam Adelson, like the Israel lobby is certainly bipartisan, et cetera. I mean, I guess that is part of it. I was watching your coverage of, I think you were talking about the crackdown on dissent, et cetera, and you were saying, the new boss feels a lot like the old boss. And, I would say that the tactics deployed by the Trump administration are extraordinary and beyond what we've seen in the past, just the overwhelming leveraging of the state, students being kidnapped off the street for writing op-eds, et cetera. But I mean, that also speaks to the fact that even though there was a revolutionary energy and a rhetorical challenge of the status quo that was represented by the Trump movement, like some of the pieces are too, just, continued upholding of the status quo. And I would say, as evidence of that, another tax cut for the wealthy coming up in the, as a follow-on to his tax cuts for the wealthy in the first administration. Again, we have differences on economics, but, the Ukraine war is still going on. We still have saber rattling with Iran. We still have crushing of dissent in, an accelerated way, et cetera.
Yeah, well, and obviously we're only, 120 or 130 days into this administration, and the big question that you just touched on is what's going to happen in the Middle East. And, it seems like they are moving forward with these plans to ethnically cleanse Gaza for the Israelis, which is just, that is something that is not like the old boss. I mean, this is a whole new step. I would say that, as with the term the woke right, it is every single person who they're smearing with that term are all the anti-war people. It's all the people who are non-interventionist. And one of the things, leaving aside kind of the billionaire class who got behind Donald Trump, obviously there were a lot of billionaires behind Kamala Harris as well, but those billionaires that did get behind Donald Trump. What I will say about the comedian podcast sphere, which I do find to be pretty interesting, is that all of them, every last one of them is anti-war. And I'm not saying that that means that Donald Trump is anti-war or that they were right to support Donald Trump or that Donald Trump's administration will end up working out that way. But one of the things that is really interesting is like, dude, I mean, I know you were talking about the other day, Theo Vaughn's recent moment where he's talking
Yeah,
about the
on
genocide
Gaza.
in Gaza. It's really, I thought it was really beautiful
Yeah.
moment. And I mean, certainly like Joe Rogan has been great on this issue. Tim Dillon is probably the best out there at just mocking the whole thing. I mean, his bit about how Sam Harris has a meditation app and then supports Bob was like one of the funniest things I've ever seen. And so I think that one of the things that I think is really positive about this is that going forward, this is kind of the new standard, is that politicians are going to have to sit down for these unedited, unscripted, long-form conversations. I actually thought my good friend Andrew Schultz did a great job with Bernie Sanders the other day and got some really interesting moments out of him that like Bernie Sanders has done so many interviews in the last 10 years and I like never saw anyone get some of the stuff that Andrew got out of him. I think the Democrats and the left, more broadly speaking, are going to have to figure out how to play this game too.
100%.
And I think Bernie Sanders was good for him for going on and like attempting to do this. The thing is that it's the death of candidates like Kamala Harris. It's the death of candidates who require this extraordinary amount of protection so that you can never really see who they are.
Yeah.
I think those days are gone. And I think that ultimately that's a huge net benefit.
I think that's a fair point. I will say I'm more skeptical of the shift, even as I am, myself in this ecosystem, because there doesn't seem, first of all, I mean, I think in terms rather than of individual people, of like the incentive structures, in corporate media, incentive structures, like, whatever the corporate boss's bottom line is, upholding that, making sure that you're maintaining your access, playing to your audience, whatever that audience is. And in new media, the incentive structure is not really different. I mean, if anything, it exacerbates some of the worst elements because you see people become even more aggressively audience captured because there's more of a connection there. There's no wall between you and the advertisers whatsoever. So there's, that direct concern. And there's still, and you see this, I mean, I'm sure you have in mind people as well who just want to suck up to the powers that be and do their propaganda for their audience, and all the incentives are aligned for them to do that. So I'm a little more wary of the shift. While being very cognizant of the failures of, legacy media, I'm also wary of the shift. And I also feel like, I do think if you're going to have the president on, the vice president on, et cetera, even if you are a comedian, you do have some sort of responsibility to press them on, okay, you say you're anti-war, but here's what the track record was in the first administration, or, well, then why are you taking all this money from Miriam Madelson? Like, I think there is a responsibility to do some of that pushback in those interviews, even if you are not yourself a journalist, if you're giving someone who has huge power or aspires to huge power this tremendous platform.
Well, I don't disagree. Like, I mean, as I'm sure you know, like, yeah, if I interviewed Donald Trump, it would be a different interview than like the interviews that some of my friends have done with him.
Yeah.
That being said, it's everything is compared to what? It's not, perfection versus what we have. It's, would you rather have this happening on a CNN town hall, or would you rather it be Theo Vaughn and Joe Rogan? And I will say that while neither Theo or Joe gave Donald Trump like a pressing, interview, like they weren't grilling him.
Right.
But I did think with Theo Vaughn, you saw a different side of Donald Trump than you've ever seen before. And I thought it was kind of fascinating in a way. Like the stuff, him getting into like his brother killing himself with alcohol and stuff like that, I actually thought was very interesting. And like, Donald Trump is such a weird guy. Like he's just however you feel about Donald Trump, he is the strangest freaking human being. And like, he doesn't speak like other people. He doesn't look like other people. He's like a cartoon character. Mm-hmm. Like, it's like you're watching the news and then a cartoon, like Roger Rabbit or something. His skin color is different than everybody else's. And so it was just kind of interesting to me to see that. And I will say that on the Joe Rogan interview, I actually thought that Joe exposed something in Donald Trump when he asked him about the election that I think nobody else has been able to. And part of that is because it was a friendly environment and they were just having a conversation. Mm-hmm. And then when he gets to asking him about the election, you saw that Donald Trump just really had nothing. He had no argument for why 2020 was stolen. Yeah. And then he almost like kind of resorted to just laughing about it because he didn't have a real answer. So look, I'll grant you that. And I remember I talked to Mehdi Hassan about this once, and he was basically saying the same thing. He was like, no, this is even worse than the corporate media because they're not just giving like puff interviews to Donald Trump. And I was like, how many CNN interviews has Donald Trump done? It's not doing anything. Like, just ask it, when CNN asks about the election, he's just going to dunk on the CNN anchor, and then that's going to be his base is going to love that. At least now, yes, is audience capture a thing? Yeah, of course. But that's a lot better than corporate capture. I mean, at least you'll be responsible to your audience and not some weapons
but
company.
I think it's corporate capture too. I mean, again, like the advertisers are all right there as well. I mean, with the Rogan interview, I think what most people took away from that wasn't like, oh, he looked like a fool on the election denial stuff. It was at a time when he was being framed as extreme. And I think he is extreme. I think his actions in office this time have really proven he's even more extreme than I expected. He got to go on and like people are like, oh, he just seems like a normal guy. Like, I think that's what most people took away from that. And Joe himself, when he previously didn't want to interview Trump, because he said, I don't want to help him. He recognized that there was power in giving someone 3 hours to just look like a normal everyday guy. And so, listen, I'm not mad at any of these people for doing the interviews. I think it's a very difficult balance to strike all of that. But I do think that it would be better served having more pushback, and that, at least in the corporate media structure, there is some sense of, okay, we've got to ask the tough question, we've got to be prepared for the follow-up, et cetera. And so, that's my concern about the direction we're going in. And, at least let me give Trump let me be charitable to him. He does all of those mainstream interviews too. Right. So it's not like he's only, but I think for a lot of politicians, and I see this because we have a lot of politicians who won't come on this show because they know we will ask them difficult questions. And I'm talking actually more about Democrats than Republicans. When you have an ecosystem set up where you can just go and do an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours or whatever and not get asked really a single challenging question, of course, most politicians, that's what they're going to gravitate towards because that feels a lot more comfortable.
Well, I mean, when Joe changed his mind to have Donald Trump, the decision he made was that he was going to have both of them on. And so one politician did not want to go into that environment. And so, look, I get your point. And, there's something to the whole thing. Like, it is, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that all of us are in the position that we're in. I don't mean you. I mean me and the comedians. It's ridiculous. But again, it's like, here we are. I don't know. I mean, this is, look, if
you're absolutely right that the Democrats have to, like, this is the world that we live in now. And so you see Pete and you see Gavin, you see the ones who, are able to string together a few sentences going out there and trying to play in the fun now.
Yeah, and the ones who aren't so incredibly insecure about their own corruption that they're terrified of being exposed. And, and Gavin Newsom is that, I think, because he's a sociopath. But, Bernie Sanders is that because he really believes in the stuff he's saying, or at least to some degree, more than most politicians. But I think that, really the kind of lesson here for anybody who's like, who doesn't like the way, say, Joe Rogan interviewed Donald Trump or something like that, is that, Joe was pushed by the establishment toward Donald Trump in the most aggressive manner. I mean, they literally tried to ruin the guy, and they went after him on stuff that he was right about. I mean, like, it was like if his doctor recommended he take ivermectin, he was right to take it. Like, I don't know. The whole thing with ivermectin, the reason why doctors recommend it is because it can't hurt. It's like, it's a drug that really doesn't have any negative side effects.
It's like being like, take a vitamin, Well,
kind of.
If it makes you feel better, whatever.
Yeah, there were a couple studies that seemed to indicate that if you take it early on, it might help with COVID. And then there were a bunch of other studies that kind of were like, no, it doesn't really seem to be doing anything. But a lot of doctors were like, well, it can't hurt, so throw this in the cocktail as well. And then they colored his face on CNN. They went this like vicious cancellation attempt against him. It's like, maybe don't do that to the guy with the biggest show. show. What were you thinking? What was the game plan here, Brian Stelter? You thought you were going to take Joe Rogan down? Like, how removed from reality these people are. And so, look, I hope that shows like Breaking Points continue to grow. I hope it gets to a point where, like, yeah, like if a presidential candidate had to go through Krystal and Sager in order to get to the White House, I think that would be a great world to live in.
That's the world we all want to live in.
Yes, and so we got to keep pushing forward with this. But that the corporate legacy media apparatus had to be destroyed in order for us to have any chance of replacing it with something better.
I just hope what is built in its wake is better, and I'm concerned about that.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.